Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to welcome you here at the Moscow Urban Forum. This is great that today's discussion raised a lot of interest and we have a lot of people in the audience. We are going to talk about our future which is going to change the culture of using public transport, which will give us opportunity to work faster, to be more effective and efficient. We are going to talk about speed, and we are going to be, of course, much more mobile. Today, Moscow transport development is ahead of development in other parts of the country and can compete with a situation in other countries. Today, many people from abroad come to Moscow to exchange experience. Today, during the discussion, you're going to find out about the fact that we are actually ahead of some of European cities by the quality of transport services. We are not only innovators, we are the city which can actually share best practices. We can become the driver in the development of public transport. Today, Moscow transport system is actually something bigger than the system for the city itself. Now we are developing our transportation system outside of Moscow, in the suburbs, in the region of Moscow. And we are going to create a more comfortable routes between Moscow and places outside of Moscow. And now I'd like to introduce all the speakers of the discussion. They are top experts. They are people who actually influence the situation with transport. Maxim Liksutov, head of the Moscow Department of Transport and Road Infrastructure Development. Cho Chongheng, Deputy Chief Executive of Land Transport Authority, Singapore. Artemy Lebedev, founder, CEO, Artemy Lebedev Studio. Dmitry Snejar, Head of Client Coverage, Senior Vice President, VTB Bank. Oleg Tony, Deputy Managing Director, Russian Railways, and Andrei Panov, Deputy Chief Executive, Aeroflot. We don't want to have very lengthy presentations. Let's start with a round of applause. It's just the beginning of the day. And I do hope that you'll welcome our speakers after the discussion as well. When I was preparing for this discussion, I actually found out a lot of interesting facts. And some of the facts, they could seem absolutely fantastic several years ago, but now they are reality. We heard a lot about the fact that the main road for the transportation development is reducing the burden and reducing the passenger flow in peak hours. Maxim, you talk a lot about it. I read some works by futurologists who say that in 10 years, we are going to have robots instead of drivers, and it will not be reasonable to have cars, to own cars. So that's what futurologists promise 10 years from now. But we don't believe it, probably, although we do a lot developing our transportation system, moving in this direction. In the last 5 or 6 years, you've made a lot of changes for the Moscow transport system. A lot of changes, parking lots, MCD, and now Moscovites are proud for their city. When we go to other cities, we are surprised not to see the same quality, the same level of service when we talk about the public transport. My question to you, tell us about the MCD project. How are you going to change the transportation system with this project? Why do you want to have such a new project? Why couldn't Moscovites simply make changes moving from one commuter train to another commuter train? you really are going to make a transformation and shift with this project. So it will be much easier for people from the suburbs to travel to Moscow and move within Moscow. Good day. I'm happy to see all of you. First of all, I'd like to say a couple of words about the future of the diameters project. This is rather complex and challenging for us. So I'd like to try to give an answer to all your questions. We work in cooperation with the Moscow railroads, and our responsibility is to make the life of passengers very comfortable. As for the self-driving vehicles, this is the responsibility of our colleagues from the railroads, Russian railroads. So that's something what these are the questions you should address to them. They can give you more expert answers, and Oleg knows much more about that. He will have the floor later today. Diameters project, it's not really a know-how which was invented by the government of Moscow. This is a project, it's not absolutely new. Similar projects have been already implemented in Paris, for example, Air, and some other countries, in Berlin. So commuter trains as a part of the city transportation system. I often go to Singapore. I sometimes go there on purpose to study the transportation system there, and I know that our colleagues from Singapore have wonderful experience, and they've implemented a lot of interesting solutions, and we wanted to use the experience and use some of the solutions for Moscow. That's great that we have our colleagues from Aeroflot at the table, because yes, they are also transporting passengers, and of course sometimes there is criticism, there are some glitches, and I hope that our colleague from Aeroflot will share their experience with regards to safety, with regards to improving the quality of service. I think that Aeroflot is a great company which set a high bar with regards to the quality of transportation. Well, yes, there are some glitches. It's possible. It's not possible to work without any challenges at all, but they show great results. I'd like now to explain what is the MCD project, the diameters, Moscow Transport Diameters project, and I'd like to explain you the main benefits of it. My first idea. We started with developing 2 diameters in Moscow. I'd like to have some slides on the screen, if possible. Slide number 3. So you know what kind of problems we had in the past. We have only one goal. Our main goal is to make sure that all the trains that go from suburbs to central stations, they have good connections. 50% of people who come to these train stations in Moscow want to continue moving to their destination. Now people have to get off the train and take subway. They need to take another train, or maybe take a bus. But for them, for example, Belaruski station, it's like a dead end. That's the final stop where they have to get off and take another way of transport. And we started thinking about prolonging the tracks from the Belaruski train station. Why can't we create the longer route for them? So maybe it will be like the train, which is which doesn't have the end stop at the Belaruski train station, but can continue traveling throughout the city. We had similar. There are similar projects, there is a similar situation in Berlin or Paris. We've made an analysis and realized that this is possible. We can increase the speed and we can increase the frequency of trains. And then this train is not just a commuter train anymore, just bringing people from the region of Moscow to Moscow. It can be transformed into a subway train when it enters Moscow. So we realized after the analysis that this is technically possible. We've realized that 50% of people who take commuter trains, they change into subway and they continue traveling. Not always the Belaruski train station is their final destination. So that would be quite logical if this train goes further. So if this train doesn't stop and if it doesn't just travels back to the suburbs, because usually on the direction from Moscow to the suburbs in the morning the commuter trains are absolutely empty, so that would be more efficient if the same train continues traveling throughout Moscow. Besides, we realized that some people are conservative and not very happy about this idea. So on this slide, you see information about the launch of the Moscow Circle Road, MCC. And you see here a lot of skepticism from journalists. There were ideas about us. There were a lot of opinions, critical opinions. Some journalists were saying that it's simply civil servants, simply authorities want to have such a trendy solutions and just show off. It's not for the people. But the project proved to be successful. We got additional investment, several billion rubles, and it was really very convenient for the people who could travel MCC, thus reducing the load on the subway trains. And we think this similar situation will be demonstrated with MCD. Now, MCC is rather popular, and it has a great distance. Its length is 54 kilometers, and you see the passenger capacity. That's 510,000 people per day, and the passenger flow is growing. My opinion is that if we have good tariffs, if we have good infrastructure, if the new line is integrated, it's going to be successful, and we are absolutely sure that MCC and MCD are going to be in demand and are going to be used a lot by Muscovites. Next idea, we are going to use new payment solutions. We are going to integrate payment solutions for MCD into the the existing transportation payment solutions, and this will help. Yesterday, we launched the new project. Now you can go from Odintsovo to Sheremetyevo Airport with an interim stop at Skolkovo without a changeover. We have only 3 trains per day. This is a pilot project launched yesterday, and so people from Odintsovo can now go to Sheremetyevo Airport. They are real people. They are not testers. They are people who needed to be at the airport and back. So this system started working in the pilot version. Which basic parameters were needed? First of all, unified infrastructure. All the metro stations and commuter train stations are going to be integrated, renovated. So we work together with the Russian railroads. We have shared responsibilities, and very soon we are going to have all the stations renovated. We will have a unified ticketing system, and people from our colleague from VTB who can confirm that, confirm the fact that the payment is going to be very smooth and easy. In several years, we want to replace all the trains, which will be absolutely new. So for MCD and MCC, the trains will be the same. It's not possible to do overnight, but we are going to do that as soon as possible. So the majority of trains will look the way it's presented on this slide. What else are we going to do? We want to make sure that the MCD service is at the level of the service Muscovites are used to in Moscow in general. So the stations will have the same opening hours. There will be special facilities for disabled passengers. There will be special helpers and assistants for such category of passengers, and inspectors who can accompany such people will work throughout all the transportation systems. So, for example, if you dial a number of a contact center, and our people with low mobility know this contact number already very well, they can explain that they need a help with meeting them and helping them to travel to the airport. This will be possible. We also integrate all the passenger pavements and cycling roads and parkings. They will be easy and integrated from the very first day when MCD starts operation. We also thought a lot about navigation. We wanted communication to be very clear for passengers. So we think that this will be a convenient navigation, and our studio of Artemy Lebedev helped us tremendously here. They also helped us with communication in general. I think that navigation is a very important element for the new transportation system, because a passenger should, of course, clearly understand how to move, how to reach the destination, where to find tickets, and so on. And Artemy Studio has been working with us for many years, and they promise to continue helping us. I think that these are the main issues that I wanted to raise.
Maxim Stanislavovich, thank you so much. Before we move to the next speaker, as agreed before, all participants of this project and experts will have a chance to start with some opening remarks, and then we'll move on to discussion. But I can't help asking you, you mentioned the skeptical approach to the MCC line, and once it became clear that this was very useful, people jumped onto this line and started using it very actively. Speaking about MCD, I can't help asking you, will this project also develop the Moscow region? Because it's an infrastructure of a totally new level for anybody who lives outside of Moscow. Are you taking a global view, or it's just the same? You're going to use the same infrastructure, but we'll just make over the train stops. Well, it happens so that a huge number of people living in the Moscow region commute to Moscow every day for work, for study. It's a normal thing. All megacities in the world are developing along this pattern. So Moscow is no exception. Of course, for young people, for those who work in Moscow or who are thinking of how to get to Moscow, they face a dilemma: a car, land transportation, metro, maybe some other ways of transport. Our goal is to, and this goal was set by the Moscow mayor, to make sure that the new infrastructure from the get-go is as widely used as possible, so that when people ask us, what about the fare, the cost, the instruction that we received from the Moscow mayor was formulated in the following way: we must do it in such a way so that the fare for the new diameters will not be a deterrence against people's choice to use that service compared to other modes of transport. So we're very near drafting and publishing the fare system that will be applicable to the Moscow Central diameters. It's at the final stages of approval with the Moscow region authorities. But the goal is to make sure that the fare does not deter people from using the MCD. So the Moscow region, for some time, will play a dominant part in the utilization of the MCD. So it will be mostly people from the Moscow region, but we believe that later on Muscovites will also start using MCD to get from one point to another. For example, by using streetcar, you go from Belaruski railway station to Komsomolsky Square at the three train stations that people take streetcars. So it would be a convenient way to move around the city. I would be keen to talk about decentralization, a key trend of the future. I would like to take this topic up later. So people will be moving from the city, will be moving towards the rural areas and suburban areas. And I think the MCD is actually speaks about this decentralization, and it plays to the hand of the decentralization. And Moscow is a place of opportunities, and those people who work here, they face tough challenges. Yes, as a follow-up, you mentioned a very important thing. Clearly, people need to make a choice not on the basis of the price of the fare, but also on the basis of convenience, the time factor, because time is a limited resource. When we started such express trains from Kryukovo, Zelenograd to Moscow, when we launched it, 25-minute travel time. Every year, I think it's a 3-year-old project, if I'm not mistaken. Every year we see a 15% growth in the ridership. Now we're dealing with limitations of the infrastructure, the throughput of the infrastructure. We, in addition to the MCD, we also launched an express train, Odintsovo-Skolkovo-Moscow. The travel time, usually if you take a commuter train from Odintsovo to Belaruski train station, there are different trains, express trains, regular trains, commuter trains. But if you take express trains, it takes you 20 minutes. But there is no other mode of transport other than, a helicopter that would take you in 20 minutes from Odintsovo to the Belaruski train station. And commuter train can take you from one place to another in less than 20 minutes. So, of course, the time factor will play an ever important role in decision making. Oleg, of course, time is of essence, is the most precious resource. A key question to everybody: would I want to be locked up in a car in the traffic jam? Of course, if you put together all the time you spend in traffic jams, it will be at least 2 weeks every year. So you stay motionless. Will it have a role? Will it have a place in the world of the future? I would like to hear about the integration of the MCD project in terms of the construction work. As far as I understand, the Russian railways will make available all its tracks for this project, but all the soft part, visualization, and the service quality will be taken to a qualitatively new level and will be in line with the public transport people got used to. Thank you for your question. True enough, speaking about Moscow region in general, or Moscow agglomeration in general, it's the largest transport hub in the country. It's a economic driver, huge logistical center, concentration of cargoes and passengers. So we've been calling this hub Central Transport Hub for an obvious reason. It's also a place where international transport corridors intersect. So if you look at any segment, this is the node. This is the heart of the transport system. So clearly, we need to provide quality service to people. People need quality services. They demand it. As Mr. Liksutov said, several years ago we started elaborating this, looking into this, developing this service. The uniqueness of the railway transport is that it's sustainable, energy efficient, profitable. It's cheaper to build railway tracks than metro. Trains run in every weather, any circumstances. So these are the advantages which are very compelling. A striking example, the MCC line, Moscow's Central Circle, the project which was launched 2 years ago. We've already transported 335 million people. Comparing to metro, every day we transport 562,000 passengers. So it's a very compelling example of how we created a seamless environment. We had our math right, and we created seamless environment. We created comfortable environment, convenient to the ridership, and the transit accessibility changes the cities. If we think back of the Soviet days, there were mostly industries and housing along the railway tracks. Now we're talking about retail, we're talking about cultural, social facilities with new jobs, etc. Why? People don't want to go downtown unless they have to. People come to appreciate time. When you live in a big city, you really appreciate time. See, we have the interchanges to the radial lines. The existing infrastructure was tied up with the new infrastructure. This added to the level of comfort, and people really appreciated that. That's what a transport interchange point looks like. Several years ago, we could only dream about things like that. Now we have this in place. It's up and running, and people enjoying it. In pursuance of this project, a decision was made to build the Moscow Central Diameters, or MCD. There is a detailed plan of works. We understand what will need to be done by 2025. The project it will be implemented stage-wise. We're not saying that 6 million people will be transported in 2025. It will be a challenging task. We're saying that every year we'll be building additional tracks, infrastructure on top of the existing ones, and every year there will be an incremental growth of passengers in the amount of several hundred thousands. And that's very important. This is enshrined in our plans. The Moscow diameters, look at them. Here what they look like. They will be working from 5:30 a.m. till 1 a.m. Clear set of services, free Wi-Fi services, ability to charge mobile phones. Sounds simple, sounds basic, but let's think back. A few years ago, we couldn't even dream of such services. We could dream, but there wasn't anything. So it was a breakthrough. I'm sure this project will be in high demand. It will be appreciated by the riding public. People will come to appreciate the beauty of these new interchange stations. You were right in pinpointing the value of it. Accessibility, transit accessibility, Lobnya, Nakhabino, Kryukovo, all those areas outside of Moscow, in the Moscow region, they will become connected. So this has been done for the people, for the residents, for the huge number of people, not only for city guests. So the people who live in different far-flung areas, from now on, it would take them 20 minutes to reach the city of Moscow and downtown areas. I think it would be a great service, given the brand new rolling stock that we have, given the high level of services we're going to provide. The first two diameters will be launched in November this year, and the head time will be 4 minutes, or the interval 4 minutes. What's the innovative nature of this system? You won't find any other transport system of this kind that would be running at such intervals. 4 minutes. Every 4 minutes you have a train coming. It's our know-how. Once we put it in place, I think we'll be selling know-how. Pilotless trains. We're working on this. It's not even so much about engineering and technologies. Already now you can travel the engineer, the locomotive driver, doesn't have to be in the front car. He can be sitting in the back car and operate the train. So we need to codify these things, and I think next year we'll have the pilot testing. Oleg Vinyansevich, thank you so much. I think everybody's holding their breath, just like myself, when you were talking about the quality of these infrastructure interchange stations. I think even given the high level of the Moscow city transport, still it's a breathtaking thing. It's pretty impressive. So, Maxim Stanislavich has already mentioned the high costs and the high level of these projects. You won't be able to recoup the cost through fares, through ticket sales. You said that people will feel the difference, but their pockets will not feel the difference. You mentioned the seamless environment, seamless interchange, seamless connection. And I will ask the same question to everybody. Don't you think that transport is becoming more than just transport? 20, 25, 30 years ago, transport was not about creation of jobs, or was not about working. People couldn't work while in transit. Nowadays, the public transport allows people to actually work while on the trains, on the buses. You also mentioned decentralization. Don't you think, and maybe Maxim Stanislavich will add to that, don't you think that it will cause a reverse movement? Because, of course, everybody's moving to the city center. Everybody's commuting to the city center. But there may be a case when people will start commuting from downtown to the outskirts and suburbia. That's where the jobs will be created. I think it's a question to those people who create jobs and who run business development, because transport follows business development. Yes, we need to develop transport system at such a high rate so that it doesn't drag on the economic development. But when needed, we need to be able to provide transport service. We need to make sure that people can be comfortably transported from one place to another. If there is a demand for reverse commuting, we'll be able to accommodate that. But there will be a decentralization, that's absolutely clear. And definitely people are moving from Moscow to the suburbia. We understand that people don't feel comfortable living in a skyscraper. People prefer to live in natural environments. They prefer to go to work, commute to work quickly. Speaking about jobs, there's a strong demand now for commuting between regional cities and Moscow, and people take those trains, daily trains. So people take a daily train. They work in the morning before they reach their destination, and then they commute back to other regions from Moscow. Before moving to the next speaker, I wanted to ask you briefly, you said the MCC was a hard going at the beginning, as we saw on the slide, and then everybody turned out to be very happy about the new opportunities. People just jumped on that. Everybody's writing about the construction of new tracks. Of course, is going to affect the interests of the people who live in the neighboring areas. I know there are protests in the Basmanny district. How to forestall such conflicts? Who's going to deal with these conflicts? The Russian railways. Do you have any plan how to deal with those protests? To put it briefly, we will be dealing with these issues, because it's a joint project and it's in our interest to see it through. Protests, well, oftentimes people say something because they don't know about all the facts. They don't have all the facts. They're poorly informed. That's why they say stuff. So our job is to inform them fully, to make it clear to them what we're going to do and how it's going to change their lives. Speaking about the current situation, all of us have had experience of renovating their apartments. We know that it's a very inconvenient experience. It's a very tough process, but we have to do it. And Moscow is a big home. It's our big apartment, and we need to renovate it once in a while to make sure everybody's comfortable. Yes, naturally, questions are being raised. People are worrying about the consequences of these infrastructural projects. But I can assure you that once these projects are implemented, even those people who live next to the railway tracks, they will feel comfortable. I don't know. Maybe we should give you an opportunity of free rides on all modes of Moscow transport for the year. I know there are different loyalty programs. I think we'll touch on that as well. Well, when you start dealing or talking to people who are unhappy about something, when people are saying, I don't want infrastructure to be expanded. But it turns out at the end that 90% of his questions are taken care of just through simple explanations. You asked a direct question about the Basmanny district and the connection between the several railway stations, the Kalanchovskaya overpass. Not to dodge this question, I want to answer it. Yes, it's under discussion. A few things. What we're going to reach, what we're going to arrive at after we relay all the tracks between the Kalanchovskaya station and the Kursky train station. First of all, they will become seamless, so the noise level will go down. Electrical transport, to remind you, is a zero-emission transport. Third point, around the Kursky train station, Kalanchovsky station, the number of vehicles will go down by 15%, according to the estimates. Of course, that will result in lower emissions. Since the system will be integrated into the Moscow Metro, based on the previous practice, after we've opened more than 70 Moscow Metro stops, the moment you have a Moscow Metro stop or an MCC or an MCD stop appears, it leads to a higher real estate prices, and we believe that coupled with lower emissions, lower noise levels, since we're going to use brand new cars and seamless tracks, this will increase the attractiveness and real estate prices in those areas. Even though the passenger traffic will increase, it would still increase the real estate prices. I was thinking about it when Oleg Venisantovich was speaking. I'm certain that the prices for real estate are set to go up once this system is put in place. A few people know that we made a decision after the renovation to move away the cargo transport from that section, from that stretch. So there'll be no cargo trains. It's the cargo trains that create most of the noise. So public awareness campaign is the key answer. You know, people who are present here, you know that Singapore is always used as an example. And people saying that everything modern, everything cutting edge, future-oriented, everything, the best of the best, is in Singapore. And we're very honored and we're very happy that we have Cho Chong-Heng, from Singapore, Deputy CEO of Land Transport Authority. You were involved with the development of land transport in Singapore, so I have a chance to put a direct question to you.
So the question to you, is this really about transport? When I was preparing for this discussion, I realized that transport is not just a mean of moving from one place to another. Transport, that's more, that's something more than just the moving people around. What do you think in Singapore about that?
Singapore, and thank you for inviting me to this dialogue. I think Singapore, for those of you who may not be familiar, we are a very small city-state. We have only about 724 square kilometers, very small island. Compared to Moscow, I think it's 2,500 square kilometers. But our population is about 5.6 million, not small, in a very small area. So how do we then ensure that the quality of living in Singapore and the economy of Singapore can grow? And one of the key things is transport. Transport is a big enabler of our economic growth and also an enabler of the quality of living. Transport in Singapore, for many years, I think we are very fortunate that we have great foresight in our earlier leaders who came up with the concept of master planning. And you do master planning right from the very beginning, where transport is planned as an integrated whole with the whole land use plan for Singapore. So in other words, transport and land use come together hand in hand. And we have a long-term vision for 50 years or more. So we know what we need to do in terms of our plans to support the growth of those areas. So having said that, Singapore land transport already takes up about 12% of our land area. Compare that to housing, which takes up about 14 to 15%. So we cannot forever be building roads to support cars. We recognize the need for roads, but we cannot continually build roads. So we encourage public transport as the way to go. And for public transport, we treat it as the backbone of our land transport system simply because it's the most efficient way of traveling and carrying masses of people quickly, efficiently, reliably, safely. And to do that, the government has invested in a number of projects to help develop our land transport system, in particular, the MRT, the railway network. We need a network so that people can choose or people can have alternative to their private cars. So let me just talk about the private transport area. We have first a very perhaps a reputation where we actually have probably the highest ownership cost for cars. I think Singapore is one of the countries where our ownership cost of cars is very high, and that is one solution to controlling the population of cars. And secondly, we also control the usage of cars through congestion management tools, for example, our electronic road pricing systems. So there we have the push factor, we push people away from private transport, and then we focus on building up our public transport and try and pull people towards the public transport. Now, how do we do that? We have master plans as well. So the latest master plan in Singapore is targeted for year 2040, and we hope that in stages, in 2030, we want our Singapore households, 80% of our Singapore households to be within a 10-minute walk of an MRT or LRT station. That's one target. Second target, in 2030, the public transport versus the private transport modal split in the morning peak hours is 75-25. So 75% for public transport, 25% for private transport. We hope to reach 80-20 by the year 2040. So these are some of the very ambitious milestones. And the other target that we have just recently been announced is to make the whole of Singapore what we call a 45-minute city. So you can travel from anywhere within Singapore, 45 minutes. But within towns, it's a 20-minute town. So from wherever you stay in the town to go to the town center is 20 minutes. So this is our new target for 2040, which has just been announced. Now coming back to the network, we have a certain plan that by 2030, we will have about 360 kilometers of MRT. It's actually a very tall order because we have no more space. We just have to go deeper and deeper, and it becomes very costly for construction. So we have the same problems as in Moscow, where you have always to face and engage the public to convince them that actually what you're doing is for the good, for the future. Now, coming to MCD, I think it's a very ambitious, but I think it's a very wise thing to do. Like in Singapore, if you look at the Singapore geography, our CBD or Central Business District is right at the southern end. So our current MRT network is like a fan. It fans out to the various areas in Singapore. But now we are building what we call orbital lines so that we can have a complete network. So this is the general planning that we have. But we think that that alone is not good enough, and you talked about decentralization. So our planners and us are working at identifying how do we gradually move jobs out from the CBD to the towns, to the various towns. In fact, we are creating a second CBD to the west of Singapore. So that kind of helped to spread the loads on our MRT system. The problem with our current network is that because of the fan structure, you get very high peak hour travel into the city in the morning. And that's why we create a lot of crowded trains. And people begin to feel very crowded. And in the evening, it goes the other way. So by having more lines, we will try to spread out the loads. By decentralizing the employment job locations and the resident locations, we try to spread out the economic activity. So these are some of the measures that are being taken in Singapore. I think may I talk about the future. But before the future, probably I'll talk about the present. I think in our annual customer satisfaction survey that we conduct for Singaporeans, a few things came up. Safety and security of our system is very important. Reliability is very important. travel time. Accessibility, to be able to access it is key. Ease of use, comfort, and of course, affordability. So these are all very key factors in people's mind. For us, I think the new line by the MCD project is an opportunity to rejuvenate not just the train system, but also the stations and influence the development, in my view, simply because in Singapore now we are looking at this concept of integrated transport hubs, ITH, where people travel to this location and then they can have multiple choices in terms of whether you travel by bus or by the LRT or by taxis or by private hired vehicles. So it's a hub, and this hub is a kind of a lifestyle experience. So we now move from just the hard comfort and to the mobility experience. So the whole journey, mobility experience becomes important. At the hub, you get opportunities to use it not just as a station, but more than a station. It's a lifestyle. And through this, actually people in Singapore are now, I think, having a changing the way of life. They're beginning to see things and experience things in a slightly different way from just taking the train and going back and to and fro. Integration is very important. So we believe in integration with transport modes. We believe in integration with developments. I think, again, if a suggestion for MCD, if you do have a chance, that you should integrate very well with the developments, be it through entrance connections or subway links. And how do you make the public transport attractive? One of the things that we need to do is, especially now we've got a lot of interchanges, how do you do the interchange, whether it's through a covered linkway or through a subway, is very important. The weather here is a big consideration. Similarly, in Singapore, we have covered linkways that we have built from all our stations within a 400-meter corridor to all our major nodes or major activity nodes. We have what we call covered linkways. Because Singapore, unlike Moscow, we have very hot weather, we have heavy rain throughout the year. So in order to encourage people to use our public transport, we have covered linkways. That means you have a linkway with a cover, need not be air conditioned, above ground, so that people can walk without getting wet and without getting too much of the sun. In terms of capacity, I think it's important that when you have the opportunity to rejuvenate your station, sizing is one thing. The other one is that whether you can enhance your passenger flow, your location of your various equipment so that you can get better experience for your customers. I think I'll stop here for now. I think there are a number of other things that we I think believe is important. But before I end, I thought I also want to address Mayor's point about technology. In Singapore, after our first 2 lines of MRT line, our subsequent lines are all driverless. So since 2003, we have all been operating on fully automated driverless trains. Okay, and this is also for metro trains. So the reason why we are doing that is not so much because we want to be at the forefront of technology, but because we do see the advantage of driverless trains in terms of flexibility. When you need to move trains in and out, you do not have to worry about whether or not you have a driver. And you can, during peak hours, if need be, you can just inject trains in. And these are all very flexible measures that can enhance your system offerings. The other part we are using technology is in the area of asset management. So for example, in the maintenance of our systems, how do we use robots, how do we use technology to do the work that these days young people do not want to do, the manual work and all that. How do you get more of technology to help you in this area? So maybe I'll just pass on from here. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Вы знаете,
Thank you very much. I was listening to you attentively, and I realized that we have so many changes which are very, very fast. Same with technologies. We used to anticipate the appearance of new technologies, but now we do not have enough time usually to adapt for all the new gadgets that we have. Artemy, addressing you, I'd like to talk about communication. You create a unified communication language for Moscow. You want to instill calm, because sometimes people are overloaded with the information. 20 years ago, the life was different, and we can't get used to all the changes. Yes, we hear about safety, speed. We have some problems with the weather, and it's a lot of factors which jump onto the person, and he has to adapt, he has to digest all of them. What kind of communications are important for a human being? You were never afraid to be straightforward. You know how to communicate with consumers in a very direct manner. So, what is going to be new for people who are going to use MCD? What kind of communications are you going to introduce? Okay, thank you very much. 10 years ago, what was the situation 10 years ago? Of course, the situation was absolutely different. No one could predict the speed and the technologies that we have now. 10 years ago, we just couldn't believe what's happening now. So the transport of Moscow was thinking about communications. They were the authorities of the Moscow metro were thinking about how to make the life of people decent, how to introduce this idea of that it's okay to use public transport, that it's okay to use buses and metro, because there is even such a term from the Soviet past, rudeness in a tramway. It was absolutely normal. When people go into a tramway, they started being extremely rude and rough. And commuter trains, they were also rather dangerous. 10 years ago, of course, the situation was like that. You all probably remember that very well. So we started dealing with navigation for all types of transportation. For the subway, we started with designing the plan of the metro lines. When we made the first metro line, we had 163 metro lines. And I think even Maxim Liksutov now doesn't know all the metro station names. So he wouldn't pass this test, I think, because it's developed so rapidly. One of the most revolutionary things which has happened in Moscow now, people can travel through to some places where he's never been before, and usually before you used to get instructions on the telephone and you were writing down how to get to a friend's house. Now it's easy to open Yandex Maps, and the Yandex application will tell you where to go, which buses to take, and it's easy. So you just enter your destination, and the application will tell you where to go. Before, you had to use some paper maps, paper transport lines. Before, it was not possible to find out how to reach a certain street. You just had to talk to people, asking them for direction. Now, it's completely different. I would say that Moscow is now seamless. The transportation is very smooth, and they even don't notice that they switch from one mean of transport to another. Are you going to have the same navigation for the Moscow central diameter as for the Moscow as for the MCC? Yes, it will be similar. We realize now that we need a unified language of communication. Before, we thought that there is a great potential for changing and improving communication, for selling the city to people, For example, now all the exits from subways, they have numbers. People don't know this yet. Take exit number 5. It actually sounds like something from the science fiction movie. Yeah, but it's already reality. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but this is a very important question. Can you give us 3 ideas? So, what is this communication language? What do people need to understand? I can do this in 1 minute. I can explain. So, the language of communication, this is the language, words, this is the style of communication, graphics, and people will use all the connections within the system without noticing it. It's a very transparent system. So you can have a calendar in your pocket, and it's also big metro lines which you see inside metro cars and inside MCD cars. Expecting, hurrying, going slowly, waiting or rushing. Language which is very clear. Car sharing. Changes in the opening hours. Moscow transport in the Moscow rhythm. This looks amazing. I remember when I used metro a lot, but then when I had children, I started using metro again after some break. And I was really happy to see that trains, that subway is now a place where I can continue consuming information. So I want to be getting some information all the time, even when I am under the ground. So it looks like from your video that all the surfaces in the subway are going to be informational stands. They're going to be always communicating with people. Yes, we want to have an automated design. Nothing is done by hand. Everything is generated automatically. If there is a change, there will be the update in the system. And very soon, all the information will be provided on the screens. So everyone has artificial intelligence. So, for example, Yandex company has Alisa, and VTB Bank has Oleg, which is also an artificial intelligence persona. So, are you going to have some persona for the Moscow transport? I don't know what will be the name for this figure. Yeah, well, I think we can find somebody. We can find a cute name for this guy or a woman. It doesn't matter what's the name for this robot, but we have a mobile application for the Moscow Metro, and we integrate Siri into this application. Yandex has some proposals, and they help people to use navigation throughout the city. I think it's not our job. Artificial intelligence is not our responsibility. The main idea is, I think, to take some solution and integrate it into our systems. So that would be good if we have some transport solutions and we cooperate with specialists who work with artificial intelligence. I don't think that we should go for software solutions. We are a transportation authority. When a train goes to the... Do you know that when the train goes to the center, there is a male voice? And when you go... when you travel from the center, there is a female voice. Like when you're going home, your wife is talking to you. And it's always easy to understand whether it's okay. But it's actually the system which was introduced during the 70s. And I'm very sorry that we don't have time to discuss everything, but I have another question. New payment systems. Of course, all the best technologies are used on Moscow transport. And I was surprised to know that you can use Alipay within the transportation network. Can you tell us very briefly about the main client-oriented life hacks? What do you need to know when you buy a Troika transportation card? And what do we have something unique in Moscow transportation payment system? How are we different from other countries? My bank, VTB, is a partner of the MCC project, and we do hope we are going to be a partner of the MCD project too, because we had great success in cooperation with the subway and with the MCC. So we have a till, absolutely standard way of payment. That's for people who like using cash. We also installed 39 automatic terminals where you can pay with cash or with a bank card. You can also buy tickets online. You can buy tickets, for example, through the application, Metro application. Contactless payment. I would say that this is a unique technology. So that's it's seamless technology. That's how you can change from the commuter train to the subway. So you can pay with your mobile phone, with Google Pay or Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. You touch the turnstile, and you don't need to buy a ticket or you don't need to buy a Troika card. If you just have a VTB card, you can change from one way of transport to another. If it's VTB, you probably get a discount, but you can pay with another card too. Several years ago, I was asking my driver to buy a ticket, but right now it's very easy. I just buy a ticket by a contactless method with my telephone when I'm already at the station. As for the cost of travel in Moscow, I would say Moscow is the cheapest city in the world. Yes, we know that salaries are not very high, but still it's the cheapest. We don't have the systems of transportation zones, and if you travel from one point to another, any distance in Moscow, this ride will have the same cost. There is a proposal for the MCD. If you buy MCD card, you will be able to travel for free on the subway. There is no such system in other cities in the world.
So people need to appreciate things we have. They need to know about them. Speaking about navigation and the new things we're going to introduce. Recently, we introduced a wonderful project, My Smart City. It's an app you can download. And now in the presentation, you can see how you can use this app in order to top up your Troika card and to pay parking. We repeatedly said that we're going to add additional services to this app. In the foreseeable future, we're going to add the bus and streetcar timetables. We're going to add a routing device which would allow you to identify car-sharing cars in your vicinity available. And it will be very handy for any traveler, any rider, both a Muscovite and a city guest. Because personally, I wouldn't find a way from my place to, say, Medvedkovo district. Another new service we're going to add or roll out very soon, and my IT colleagues may prove me wrong, but I haven't found an equivalent service anywhere in the world. So what we're going to do, we're going to add Apple, Google, and Samsung. So you're going to have an electronic card in your phone. So it'll be a Troika card in your phone, electronic Troika card in your phone. I don't think there's any place in the world that could boast this. We're gonna have it rolled out by the end of the year. And another a thing of fashion, we've already tested it. Entrance to the metro using facial recognition techniques. It's much talked about. We understand that anywhere where you have turnstiles and when you have to pay for your ride, that it will cause some delay. So it will take some time for people to pass through turnstiles. And so we're addressing this issue, and face is one of the opportunities. In the Frankfurt metro, people don't use turnstiles. And the authorities assume that you have a ticket. If you get caught without a ticket, you'll have to pay 70 euros in fine. That's not our way forward, but I think that face recognition is the way forward. Do we still have 10 minutes? Because we're running out of time, and the young person over there is signaling that we're out of time. So, okay, we need to put an end. Andrei Panov, I'm interested in one thing. What about the personnel client telecommunication technologies that Aeroflot is using that we can use in our daily life? Yes, I'll try to be brief. We have three key elements allowing us to get all the bonuses. First of all, we have passenger feedback, then we follow global experience, and we're relying on digitalization. Speaking about feedback and passenger surveys, we understand that we shouldn't be guided by the opinions of the bloggers or mass media. We should be guided by the broader public audience. Every year we survey thousands of passengers to identify the weak points that we need to work on. Passengers come up with different ideas. It's a sort of a crowd thinking. Sometimes people say that we need to change the color palette of our planes or add wine to the economy class, some other ideas that they may float. I think it's important for us as a company to respond to passengers' feedback and do it regularly. International experience, ROR in Paris, those people who arrive in Paris, they don't live in Paris. They see no difference between ROR and metro because stations are the same. Unfortunately, the same dirt, but still, they don't feel the difference between ROR and the Paris metro proper. And the last point is digitalization. I think it's very important. Moscow is doing a lot along this line. Moscow is providing info about its transport, so transport data, it's offering it to external providers. So we need to share data. In Singapore, for example, you can look at the bus and you can see whether there are seats available on that bus. If we have buses or trains every 5 minutes, running every 5 minutes, they can choose between commuter trains. If the commuter train, the next one is full, they can, opt for the next one. I think we need to move in this direction. Thank you, Andrei. Thank you, all panelists. It's awesome to realize that we can share experiences even with Singapore now. It's great to realize that we've reached this point. It's very novel to us. We realize that we can be better than anybody else in the world somewhere. I think everybody is going to be affected by these changes. I don't know if any of you are using public transport. I think 5 years down the road, we're going to switch to public transport because it will be safer, cheaper, more comfortable. It will become part and parcel of our everyday life. Cars will no longer be a status symbol. I think that the status symbol would be riding the public transport. I wanted to ask all of you to stay in the Niglinka Hall. I think we've had a great discussion. I wanted to thank you for that. I want to say that Yandex is playing an increasing part in the Moscow transport network. Yandex is about car sharing, taxi applications. What does it mean? What does the central Moscow diameters, what does the launch of this Moscow central diameters mean to Yandex? We're going to find out about it soon.